Well, this is the boundary of the cell, and here you have an ACE receptor. The virus has got a spike protein that in the end has got a receptor binding site, receptor binding domain, which sticks to this ACE receptor. The spike protein also has a fusion protein. So the membrane of the virus fuses with the membrane of the cell. So it fuses like this, and you have this membrane fuses like this, and you have the virus particles inside the cytoplasm. These are the RNA of the virus, so they are inside the cytoplasm of the cell. They search for their photocopying machine, which is the ribosome. And this ribosome, these virus particles hijack this ribosome and make many more particles like this. So the ribosome is the photocopying machine. For the virus. Then this is the nucleus. So these viral particles, if they want to enter the nucleus, they search for a protein which is called as transportin. So this transportin helps this virus particle enter the cell. So this virus particle is in the cell, and here it affects the DNA. As it affects the DNA, it blocks the interferon action of the DNA, interferon TNF action of the DNA, which is responsible for warning other cells. Of a viral attack. So this system is blocked. The second thing it does is that it starts an inflammatory cascade, mainly involving serotonin, and that damages the lung and can cause death. So these viral particles make the DNA do these two things. Now our ivermectin blocks the ACE receptor, so that this virus cannot, the receptor binding site cannot bind. Then so it blocks the ACE receptor here. It blocks, so damages this photocopying machine by damaging the replicase part of the RNA of the virus. So this multiplication cannot occur. So that is the second. And the third thing is that it blocks the transportin. So any consequent effect of the DNA, that means blocking of the interferon system or the inflammatory cascade, does not occur. So with this information, would you use ivermectin and COVID-19 in your next patient or not? Good evening. Greetings from Lucknow. Today we will find out how to say yes to a suggested treatment, considering cost, effectivity, safety, and doability amongst various options available for a serious condition. The scenario is that you have been phoned up at 1 o'clock at night saying that your friend has fever and cough since last 2 days and now he's feeling a little bit of breathlessness. Should he or should he not take ivermectin? Then you say you will get back to him in half an hour and you ring me up and I give you the following information. I'll go on enhancing the information and you tell me at what point you will decide to give ivermectin. So you keep on noting down as you go on increasing the information. I say that I have rung up Professor Randeep Guleria, who's the director, AIIMS Delhi. He tells me that no, it is not in the protocol now. We can use only paracetamol and vitamin D. Note down whether you will give ivermectin or not. The second is that you ring me up and I say give it yaar. It's a cheap drug, safe drug, no harm in giving it. Note down your decision. You ask me further, so I say you ask me further about ivermectin, so I tell you that it is cheap, safe, has been used for 40 years against worm infestations including scabies, is generic, thus there are no patent issues, anybody can make it in any amounts, so it can be used in a pandemic. It blocks shutting down of chloride receptors in nerves of invertebrates, leading to excess chloride in the nerves, paralysis and death of the worm, and its expulsion. The person who discovered it got a Nobel Prize. The drug has FDA and WHO approval for use in scabies. You need 10 times the effective dose to produce toxicity. Since it normally does not cross the blood-brain barrier or placental barrier, its effects on brain and fetus are still not much known, so it is contraindicated in conditions like meningitis, pregnancy, or lactating mothers. But still nothing on the virus. So you want more results, you're not convinced. So I say that in a study in Australia, they found that virus production in SARS-CoV-2 infected cells was reduced by 98.6% in vitro within 48 hours by ivermectin. But the drug concentrations used was 10 times higher than the concentrations in plasma by a dose of 0.2 milligram per kilogram body weight. But these 10 times higher doses are still below the toxic levels. The discussion continues. I say that in UP and Bihar, with the COVID pandemic, ivermectin was used at this point here in UP, and you can see the decline in fatalities. Bihar was using it right from the beginning, so that is the green line. But in Kerala it was not used, so you see what happened to the fatalities, and you can see what happened to the case incidence. So ivermectin is not only prophylactic, it also prevents fatalities. So I show you this. That's why I say that please use it. And then I say that even in Mexico, they used ivermectin here, and this is what happened to fatalities. They used it from giving people ivermectin from the test booths. As soon as they tested positive, they gave ivermectin, and you can see the effect of the plummeting death rates. Then I say that in 8 states in Mexico, they used ivermectin, and this is the case and fatality. This is the case graph, this is the fatality graph in those 8 states, the blue ones, and in the other states, the red one shows what happened to the fatalities and case rates. So I show you another evidence. Still decide. Then I say, yeah, use it. My son-in-law responded beautifully to ivermectin. He didn't even have to go to the hospital. I published the case report in Lancet. You can see it in the Lancet. Still you decide to use it or not. Then I quote you a case series from Razor. It says that 20 out of ivermectin exposed died in a total of 173. So the risk is 20 upon 173. The odds are 20 upon 153. So in the odds, the denominator does not contain the numerator, so it can be higher than 1. So remember, this is the difference between risk and odds. Many people don't remember it. If you solve it, you get 11% risk of death in people who got ivermectin and 13% odds of death. So I increase the evidence why you should use it. Keep on writing whether you will use it at this stage or not. Then I add more data to the Razor study. I say in the not exposed, 27 out of 107 died. In the exposed, only 20 out of 173 died. So the risk in the exposed is 20 upon 173, odds are 20 over 153. The risk in the not exposed is 27 upon 107, and the odds are 27 upon 80. You get the odds ratio in this and the risk ratios in this. And these odds ratios and risk ratios, if they are equal in the exposed and not exposed, then ivermectin has no effect, and you say that the null value of the risk ratio and odds ratio is 1, which means no effect. Now these are point estimates from a single study. What will happen if I keep on repeating the study 100 times? Then I will have some variation in these risk ratios and odds ratios, and there will be a range, a lower limit and upper limit. So the range, if the range is x to y, then, and if this range is in 95 out of 100 trials, then I call it 95% confidence interval. And this is one way of saying that if in this range, if it doesn't contain the null value, then I say that the result is statistically significant. The association of ivermectin with death rate is significant. Another way to say it is that p is equal to less than 0.05, which means that if I repeat the trial 100 times, only in 5 times will I get a value more extreme than what I am getting in the study. So this is the value of 95% confidence interval and p-values of risk estimates. You can discuss it if you have not understood it till now. So what is the problem with these observational studies? I mean, would you believe this observational study or not? The answer is not, because these observational studies are the two group, the ivermectin group and the non-ivermectin group, may be different on some other factors which would explain the results. These other factors are called as confounders. For example, if there were more asthmatics in the control, then that would explain why more people died in the control group. Here the variable asthma, yes or no, is a confounder, and it is the other explanation of the effect that we are seeing. Therefore, the proportion having asthma must be different in the exposed and the unexposed for the asthma variable to confound. That means there should be more asthmatics in the control group as compared to the experimental group for asthma variable to be able to confound. Now, how do we control confounding? Well, exclude cases who had asthma. That is called as restriction. And it's a bad policy because you would be able to say nothing about asthmatics. The second way is for each asthmatic in the exposed, take one in the control group also, so that the proportion of asthmatics in the exposed ivermectin group and the non-ivermectin group are same. And in this circumstance, this is called as matching. The asthma presence or absence would not be able to confound. The third way is that draw 2 by 2 tables finding risk ratio, odds ratios for the asthmatics and non-asthmatics separately. And if the risk ratios and odds ratios in the two tables are different, report them separately. And if they are similar, combine them to get what is called as the Mantel-Hansel adjusted odds ratio or risk ratio. This approach is called as stratified analysis. But if instead of asthma there are many other variables, diabetes, hypertension, asthma, age, everything is trying to confound, then you use what is called as regression analysis. Here the log of the odds, of death in the COVID will be beta 0, some number, plus beta 1 x1 of the ivermectin, plus beta 2 x2 to beta n xn of all the confounders. And you will get the relation between the treatment and the log of odds, keeping all other factors constant. So here you can convert the odds of death into probability by using the formula that odds is equal to probability of death over 1 minus probability of death. But all these 5 ways will deal only with known confounders, x1, x2, x3, x4. They are all known confounders. But if you randomly allocate to the ivermectin or control group over a sufficient sample size, this random allocation will equalize the treatment groups on both known and unknown confounders and leave only the type of treatment. That means ivermectin yes and no to explain the results. Thus, randomized controlled trials are more believable than observational studies. In fact, it is from here that the research on treatment starts becoming believable. Now, what if you have to test a randomized controlled trial, whether it is well done or not? Then you see some technical issues and some ethical issues. The technical issues, the first thing you test is whether the source population is representative of the target population, whether the selection from the source population has been random over a sufficient sample size or not. Supposing you have taken only hospital patients, their results cannot be used in general population. That is called as selection bias or Bergson bias or hospital bias. Secondly, the randomized control trial may have a very small sample and very less power to see the association as significant. Therefore, it may be negative when the effect is actually positive. So you can get a false negative in a small sample size. The third thing is that even despite random allocation, the two groups may still be different on some factors, which may still confound and which may need to be controlled by regression analysis. The fourth thing is co-intervention. That means any of per patient may have taken something else. Then there can be a contamination. That means people may have switched groups. The control group may have started taking ivermectin. There may be a crossover, which is the similar thing. There may be loss to follow up. And finally, there is a measurement bias. That means you have overestimated or underestimated the effect because you are not blind to the exposure of the patient. So if you have to subjectively measure response, then the patient and the observer has to be double blind to the group that the patient belongs to. So this blinding takes care of the measurement bias in subjective measurements of outcomes. Objective measurement, for example, CPR value will not be affected by measurement bias. Then the ethical considerations. The first and the most important ethical consideration is that the trial intervention must not be more costly, more toxic, or more unlikely to be effective than the existing system. Randomized controlled trials are done to improve, not to become less, not to become worse than the existing treatment. The second important thing is that anything that is technically not correct is unethical. The third thing is that if one treatment is superior to the other, it's already known, then it is unethical to give an inferior treatment to the patient. Even if in between a trial you find that one of the arms is doing much better than the other, then you stop the trial and give all recruited patients the superior treatment. The fourth is that there must be informed consent. Full information, no duress, well-designed rules to stop trial in case of toxicity and manage patients having toxic effects at no cost to them. The fourth is that the source population must benefit from trial. You must not do a trial in India to benefit a patient from America. The fifth is that you must ensure dissemination of results and you must take the research to action. Trials are a very costly thing. People have suffered to give you the result. So they have suffered inferior treatment. So you must ethically be able to take them to use for common people. You must not waste them. So when there are small RCTs and you need results fast, so you collect many RCTs and try to pool them together. So these RCTs, when they are pooled, this is called as meta-analysis. Observational studies can also be pooled and randomized controlled trials can also be pooled. So you pool similar trials, the sample size becomes bigger, the estimates of association are much more precise, the confidence intervals are narrower, and the results are much more generalizable because the studies have been done in different settings in much wider source populations. So meta-analysis are much more powerful than randomized controlled trials. But you have to judge for problems with meta-analysis, and they are that smaller negative studies may not have been published. This is called as publication bias. Therefore, publication bias has to be treated by or detected by what is called as a funnel plot. We'll show you a funnel plot. Then there is a huge wait for results of meta-analysis. Meanwhile, millions may die of COVID-19 before you get a reliable meta-analysis. So you may decide not to wait for a meta-analysis. So here is an example of meta-analysis in COVID-19. These OBS, these are observational studies, and below are randomized control trials. And here are the odds ratios, the 95% confidence intervals, the p-values, and here are the ratios in the ivermectin and the control group. And this is the point test. This one is the null value of 1, and more to the left side is favoring ivermectin. So these dots that you see are point estimates, and the lines across the dots are interval estimates. When you pool the data, you get this triangular structure like this. So when you pool the data of 1, 2, and 3 trials, this is the triangular thing that you get here. These plots are called as forest plots. All right. So you can see that this forest plot is more on the left side as compared to this forest plot, which was done for scabies, ivermectin and scabies. The WHO has approved this, and it is being asked why it has not approved this. So less evidence approved, more evidence they are sitting over. Next, this is the example of funnel plot. You get a p-value from what is called as a Harbord test, and if it is insignificant, means that there is no publication bias. So here is a forest plot which is seeing how many patients on ivermectin deteriorated, and you see all the dots and the lines are favoring ivermectin, and only 2 of the lines have crossed the null value. So this says that if you take ivermectin, you would not deteriorate given that you have COVID-19. So your decision, ivermectin, yes or no? WHO says no. NIH says not sufficient evidence. MOH, Government of India, first said use ivermectin, now says don't. ICMR says use it. FLCC, which has analyzed the maximum data, says that it is criminal not to use ivermectin to save lives. There is no, saying no is mala fide to help sell costlier drugs and vaccines. So you can find out at what time your no became yes, and of course, if a cheap, safe drug can save a life, it is worth a trial. So common sense is the most important thing in choosing a drug which is effective, which is cheap, which is safe, and a treatment which is logistically doable in your settings. If you can't do a treatment and still it is good, you please refer the patient to other places where it can be done safely.